What's up, gamers? If you clicked on this video, you probably need some spice in your Rotmg experience and thought a new challenge would be a perfect way to enhance your gameplay. Or maybe you just saw a sexy white bag in the thumbnail. Doesn't matter. The point is, you clicked on the video and you want to know what's what. Well, it all started a couple of months ago. I was just like you. I was kind of bored of the game and I also wanted to spice up my Rotmg experience. So I did something about it. I went to my twin brother and I said, Spencer, this game kind of blows. I think I'm gonna go play Fortnite. Huh? But I stopped myself from getting bullied by toxic Fortnite 9-year-olds and I started brainstorming a new Rotmg challenge. It was a UPE, or UT and ST only PPE, where I go through every dungeon in order, starting with Pirate Cave and going all the way to 03 and getting every single item I need for the class I'm playing on. And you know what Spencer said? He said, dude, that sounds like the shittiest challenge ever conjured up in Rotmg. And yeah, looking back, it definitely was terrible. But I was still committed to coming up with a challenge I could do. So after a day or two of brainstorming with Spencer, he and I were able to come up with the finalized version of the new challenge, the UTPPE. UTPPE stands for Untiered Progression Player Experience. So basically, we split up the dungeons into tiers. There are 6 tiers, starting with Tier 1 and getting more difficult up until Tier 5, because Tier 6 is seasonal stuff. For example, Tier 1 dungeons include Pirate Cave, Forest Maze, Forbidden Jungle, Hive, and Spider Den. I'll talk more about tier specifics later, just know that there are 6 tiers. The challenge revolves around the dungeon tiers, and the whole point is to collect every item from each dungeon tier for your class before you can progress to the next tier. So, for example, if you wanted to do a Wizard UTPPE, you would have to get Staff the Crystal Serpent and Robe of the Tlatoani from Forbidden Jungle before you could start doing Tier 2 dungeons. That being said, UT rings are required for every class in order to advance to the next tier. So for the Wizard example from earlier, yes, you would have to get the staff and the robe, but you would also have to get the ring from Forbidden Jungle, and you'd have to get the ring from Pirate Cave and the ring from Spider Den. ST rings, like First Mate Hook, are only required for classes that pair with another ST from the set. In other words, you only need to get an ST ring on your UTPPE if you can also use another ST piece in the specified set. So, First Mate Hook, you only need to get it if you're a melee, right? Because Naval Uniform, it pairs with First Mate's Hook. They're both part of the same set. A wizard cannot use Naval Uniform, or the sword, or the helmet, so it does not need to get First Mate's Hook. First Mate's Hook is the only ST item from that set that the wizard can use. A UTPPE is able to get and use anything from the realm anytime during the challenge, seasonal events included. So theoretically, a knight in Tier 1 could get an Augmer and a Keychain Cutlass. Another aspect of the challenge is that tiered items are available to use, but they have to be tier progression. Secondary weapons can be acquired once you get a Tier 6 normal weapon on your UTPPE, because they start at Tier 7 for some reason. I don't know why Deca didn't include Tier 0 secondary weapons, but they start at Tier 7. However, main and secondary weapon tier progression are separate. So if I was a Knight UTPPE and I had a Tier 6 sword, I could pick up a Tier 7 flail if I found one. However, if I picked up the Tier 7 flail, I could not pick up a Tier 8 sword, because I still don't have a Tier 7 regular sword. Alright, let's move on to what dungeons are in each tier. Alright, so for the dungeons that are in each tier, a good way to find which dungeons you need to do, go to Stats, and then go down to the dungeon bonuses right here. And Tier 1 is going to start with the first dungeon, Pirate Cave, and it's going to go all the way down to Spider Den, so you get these 5 dungeons right here. Once again, the goal of the challenge is to get every item that you can get in these 5 dungeons before you move on to the next tier, which would be Tier 2. This starts with Ancient Ruins and goes all the way down to Candyland, right here. So there's a lot of dungeons included in Tier 2, but an easy way to remember them is that they're all Godlands dungeons, or at least most of them are. Once you get all of the items that you can in Tier 2, you're going to go ahead and move on to Tier 3. So this includes Parasite Chambers, D-Docks, Wood Lab, and Sea Depths. Just remember that I know I said Tier 2 dungeons are mostly Godlands dungeons, but keyword mostly, because D-Docks, Wood Lab, and Sea Depths, although they're Godlands dungeons, they are part of Tier 3, because they're a little bit more difficult than the other Godlands dungeons. Also part of Tier 3 is Wine Cellar. Let me find it real quick. Here it is, Wine Cellar. So this is part of Tier 3, and it also includes Oryx's Chamber, which is 01, and Oryx's Castle, which is Stone Guardians and Janus.
Huh?
So once you get all the items that you can from Tier 3, you can move on to Tier 4, which is going to start with Davy Jones' Locker, and it's going to go all the way down to Tomb of the Ancients. So these dungeons right here, these are encounter dungeons, so dungeons that drop from guys that are in the realm, excluding Exaltation dungeons. So, yep, these 7 right here, and also it includes Court of Oryx dungeons. So even though you can do Janus in Tier 3, you cannot do Court of Oryx until you get to Tier 4. So that's going to include Shaitan, Encore, Reef, Thicket, and High-Tech Terror. A miscellaneous dungeon that's in Tier 4 is Beachstone, right down here, because it drops from Beach Bum, which is technically an encounter in the realm. So once you get all the items you can from Tier 4, now you get to the really hard stuff. So Tier 5 is going to be Exaltation dungeons. This includes Shatters, Nest, Fungal Crystal, Halls, Cult, Void, and O3. Tier 5 is basically, once you beat Tier 5, you beat the challenge pretty much. I know that Tier 6 is still a thing, but pretty much the only aspect of Tier 6 is to collect every item that you have not collected yet. So basically to 100% the challenge. Tier 6 is going to include Belladonna's Garden, all the way down to Santa's Workshop. Remember that Beachstone is part of Tier 4. So all these dungeons, a good thing to point out in Tier 6 is Machine is part of Tier 6. So just because you see a machine in the realm while you're farming for Godlands dungeons does not mean you can go inside. It is part of Tier 6, so you gotta wait until you get to Tier 6 to do machine stuff. Another thing to point out is aliens are part of Tier 6 as well, because they're technically a seasonal or event type thing. So don't go in an alien dungeon if you see it either. You can kill Calbrick, though, because Calbrick is in the realm, and anything in the realm, seasonal or not, is always fair game anytime you're doing a UTPPE. Another important aspect of Tier 6 is that you unlock the Tinkerer at Tier 6. So this allows you to do seasonal like tokens. You can trade those in if you want for the Tinkerer. You can also get quest chests if you wanted to. You could also trade in Agents of Oryx shards for the guaranteed Agents of Oryx item. However, you do not have to wait till Tier 6 to get Agents of Oryx stuff, because you can collect one stack and then pop it and hope that you get lucky with the items, and that way you could get them anytime you have enough shards. Alright, that concludes the dungeon's tier specifications, so let's move on to some miscellaneous rules. Before we get to the multiplayer aspect of the challenge, I have some quick generic rules to go over. Nothing from the vault can ever be used on your UTPPE, unless it was gotten on your UTPPE. This includes loot drop that you already had, keys that you already had, backpacks, Agents of Oryx shards or any other shards that you already had, and XP boosters. I personally only use dyes that I get on my character from playing on it, but if you really wanted to, you can dye your UTPPE in Nexus. I just think it's more fun to actually get my cloths and dyes on my character instead of just buying the ones that I think look good. Also, Forge is off limits the entire duration of the challenge, along with daily calendar and any battle pass or campaigns. You cannot use any of those things for the whole challenge. Another rule, this is very specific to the first mate's hook item, so it drops in Pirate Cave and D-Docks, which comes to a problem. You know, which tier should it be a part of? Well, what me and Spence came to is that you can grind for it in Tier 1 if you want, but as soon as you pass Tier 1, you cannot go back and get it from Pirate Cave. You would have to wait till D-Docks to get the first mate's hook. Agents of Oryx stuff, like I said earlier, are obtainable through chest events, but Tinkerer is part of Tier 6, so until you get to Tier 6, you would have to random pop all the shards that you get. You could not trade them in. Another rule, this is about tiered rings. So for tiered ring progression, basically you would have to get tiered the specific stat for the tiered ring in order to progress. What I mean by this is like, if you wanted to get a tier 4 HP ring, you would have to get tier 1, 2, and 3 HP ring, instead of getting like tier 1 HP ring, then tier 2 dex ring, then tier 3 vit ring, and then tier 4 HP ring. You cannot do that. You have to do each ring for each stat. Granted, HP rings are the only like actually good tiered ring, so there's no point in getting like tier progression for every stat ring. I feel like there's no point in doing that. Alright, now for the multiplayer aspect. This is actually my favorite part about the challenge, and I highly recommend that if you guys want to participate in the challenge, you find some buddies that want to do it as well. So, you guys, if you do multiplayer, you can actually get items with each other and collaborate, but there's some specific terms that go with collaborating. Number 1, the players that are trading items to each other, they need to be in the same dungeon or realm as each other when they get the items. So, if I was in an abyss as a UTPPE, and one of my buddies, a wizard, comes in to the abyss, and we do it together, and he gets a D-Blade, well, he can give me that D-Blade because we did the dungeon together. But, this brings me to rule number 2. If the wizard was not a UTPPE, then he could not give me the item. Both people that are trading need to be on a UTPPE. That way you don't have someone really overpowered just rushing the dungeon and getting you items. That just doesn't seem like it would be very fun. Rule number 3, stat pots cannot be traded, and hand-me-downs cannot be traded. So, stat pots, really simple. UTPPEs, even though you can trade items to each other if you get them, you cannot trade stat pots because I just feel like maxing is not very hard, and UTPPEs, you guys should just max by yourselves. What I mean by hand-me-downs not being traded is items that you get and that you don't want anymore or don't need anymore, that you're just going to drop on the ground, you cannot give them to another person. For example, if I had tier 11 armor, and I got tier 12 armor, well, I don't need my tier 11 armor anymore, so I couldn't just go give it to someone else that needed tier 11 armor. I would have to drop it on the ground and then find a new tier 11 armor for the person that needed it. Another example of this is, if I was in a Candyland with one of my buddies and we were both on night UTPPEs, and I got a candy-coated armor. Well, my buddy didn't get so lucky and did not get a candy-coated armor. Okay, that's fine. So we wait a few days, you know, and then we're playing again together, and I decide that, you know, I got candy-coated armor, I checked it off my list, but it's not very good, so I don't want to use it anymore. Well, I couldn't just give it to my buddy. I would have to drop it on the ground or sell it or do something else. You know, just put it in your vault. You can't give it to someone else just because you don't want it anymore. In other words, you cannot use one single item to check off of multiple people's UTPPE lists. Alright, I know that was a little bit complicated, but moving on. I know it was a lot to take in, but I think I covered just about everything in the challenge. If any of you have any questions or comments about the challenge, definitely let me know in the comments section below. I will include a link with a really helpful Excel spreadsheet, thank you to DJ Mickey and Plastrix for making it, and a video that helps you identify which items you need and which dungeons they drop from. Real quick, I cannot stress this enough, this challenge is not for everyone, so I am sorry if you don't like it, but me and a few of my guildies tried it out and I had a lot of fun with it, so I just wanted to share it with the community. I'll be starting a new UTPPE very shortly and posting my progress on YouTube, so be sure to look out for that. The class I'll be doing is Knight, so hopefully it'll be fun and I get an Augmer. Please, please Augmer. Spencer will also be doing UTPPE on Twitch at Mrfreeeze, so be sure to watch that too. Alright folks, that's all from me. You all take it easy. Peace.